Listen carefully. I intend to divorce you and marry her.
There's an age gap, but he's wealthy and kind. I'll be happy. Divorce him for me, will you? Are you listening? I had always suspected something, but it turned out my husband and my daughter were indeed in a romantic relationship. Marry her? I don't understand.
We've been together for a long time. I love her.
Frank confessed his relationship with her, unashamed and somewhat proud.
If one is an older woman and the other is a young one with the same face, of course, I'd choose the younger one. She looks like you, so isn't that fine?
Their affair had apparently been going on for nearly 10 years. It was unbelievable. They had deceived me for years. Frank was 58, and Daniel was 38. Despite the significant age difference, it seemed not to matter to them. They laughed heartily at my shock. I could somewhat tolerate my husband's betrayal. Our marriage had been cold for a long time. But her betrayal was harder to bear. She was the daughter I had raised with all my might. So, I revealed a hidden fact to her. She turned pale immediately. My name is Sophia. When I was 30, my then healthy and hardworking husband died in an accident. Despite my grief, I was determined to work hard for my only daughter, her. Daniel was 10 years old when her father died, and I worked tirelessly to support her. Although my parents provided some financial help, I couldn't rely on them forever. So, I juggled multiple jobs to cover our monthly expenses. During the day, I worked at a diner and at night, at a bar. She went to daycare during the day and my parents' house at night. I didn't want her to feel lonely, but I had to cut back on our time together for work. On my rare days off, I spoiled her with things she liked and took her places. That was my purpose in life. Years passed, and she turned 18. She got into her desired university and was set to start living on her own in the spring. When she left, she said to me, "Mom, thank you for raising me. Now, please enjoy your life at your own pace." At that time, I was dating a regular customer from the bar. Frank, knowing I was a widow and a single mother, was kind and praised me for raising my daughter well.
It's admirable that you raised your daughter so well.
Encouraged by her words, I decided to remarry Frank. Once she settled into university life, I introduced him to her. "Nice to meet you. I'm her daughter."
Nice to meet you too. You look just like your mother. You're beautiful.
Frank seemed surprised by how much she resembled me in my younger days. "Please take care of my mother." She bowed deeply. Despite having made her feel lonely before, she now wished for my happiness. I was overjoyed at how kind-hearted she had grown. 20 years passed. Frank climbed the corporate ladder and became an executive. Daniel worked at a major apparel company after graduating from university. I quit my night job after marrying and continued my daytime job. On the surface, my life seemed smooth, but my relationship with Frank had grown cold. Looking back, his attitude changed soon after we married. While dating, he was kind and cheerful, but after marriage, he often ignored me, saying he was tired. As he rose in his career, he worked more overtime and weekends, reducing our time together. But oddly, he welcomed Daniel warmly whenever she visited. "Oh, Dad, you're so funny."
Is that so? Well, at that time.
They often had conversations I couldn't understand, making me feel isolated. Normally, it would be good for a daughter and husband to get along, but their closeness made me uneasy. Despite rarely talking to me, Frank was very engaged with her. Was I jealous? No, their closeness seemed unusual to anyone. My suspicions were confirmed. Hey, Sophia, are you good with Frank? During a visit to my parents' house, my mother asked me this with a complicated expression. I had never discussed my marital issues with her, not wanting to worry her. Why do you ask all of a sudden? I debated whether to tell you, but I saw something. She began to explain. Despite being nearly 80, my mother often went out alone. Recently, she had taken a train to a nearby town for shopping and saw something. I saw Frank and Daniel walking arm in arm. It was inappropriate, so I felt uneasy. Wait, that can't be. Frank is supposed to be overseas. He shouldn't be in America. Frank had left for an overseas business trip the previous day. I thought my mother had mistaken someone else for them. But she insisted it was them and showed me a photo on her phone. There they were, arm in arm, looking more like lovers than family. Why? It's definitely them. What's going on? Frank, supposedly on a business trip, was with Daniel. Though legally father and daughter, they weren't related by blood. The photo showed them as lovers. I shuddered at the thought and immediately called Frank.
What's up? I'm still out. Call later if it's not urgent.
Where are you? Aren't you on a business trip?
Of course. I just arrived at the airport.
His tone didn't match his words, as I heard American English in the background. I heard English. Are you really abroad?
It's my colleague. We're all here for the trip. Busy now, gotta go.
He hung up abruptly, clearly flustered. Suspicious, I called her next. Hello, Mom. What's up? She sounded calm. Where are you? At a restaurant with colleagues. Why? She sounded sincere, but I noticed the same music from Frank's call playing in the background. They were together. Days passed with my doubts unresolved until Frank's 60th birthday approached. We planned a party at home, inviting Daniel. Despite my suspicions, I prepared for the party. On the day, Daniel arrived as planned. Here, this is a present for you, Papa. You said you liked it before, remember? I found it at a store and bought it. I thought you'd be happy. Daniel handed a wine bottle to Frank. Sure enough, it was a brand that Frank liked.
Oh. You remembered, I'm happy. Let's drink it together right away. Hey, Sophia, hurry up and prepare the meal.
Contrary to his attitude toward Daniel, Frank treated me like a housemaid. Even after we sat at the table to start eating, they flaunted their closeness. Hey, when did you two become so close? You seem unusually comfortable with each other. Unable to contain myself, I said this sarcastically, and Frank smirked maliciously.
Ha ha ha, what's this? Are you bothered by it? Well, it's a good opportunity. I think it's time to tell you the truth.
Saying this dramatically, Frank pulled out a piece of paper from his pocket and thrust it in front of me. It was a sheet of paper with printed text on a white background. It was a divorce application form with Frank's name already filled in.
I'm tired of living with you. Let's get a divorce.
What? Even if you suddenly say that. Ignoring my bewilderment, Frank and Daniel started saying something outrageous.
Listen carefully. I plan to divorce you and marry Daniel.
Marry Daniel? Why? Why such a sudden thing? I don't understand.
It's not sudden. We've been together for a long time. I love Daniel.
As expected, Frank and Daniel were romantically involved. Frank confessed their relationship without any guilt, and even seemed somewhat proud.
If you have to choose between the same face, one older and one younger, you'd obviously choose the younger one.
Frank admitted that he had liked Daniel instead of me from the first time they met. Their relationship apparently had been going on for nearly 20 years, right after our marriage. I couldn't believe it, but it meant that they had been deceiving me for years. Frank was 60, and Daniel was 38. Despite the significant age difference, it didn't seem to matter to them.
Unlike you, a nagging old woman, Daniel is kind and, most importantly, young. She looks like you, so it's like saying I love you. It's actually better, isn't it?
There's an age difference, but he is rich and kind. I'll be happy, so divorce him for your daughter's sake. Are you listening? Daniel mocked me as I remained silent, stunned by the absurdity of it all. Are you too shocked to speak? Well, you'll just have to spend your miserable old age alone. It's inevitable. Anyone would choose the younger person if the faces are the same. Seeing me in shock, they both laughed heartily. I could deal with my husband. Our marriage had long been cold, and I was prepared for such a day. But the betrayal of my daughter, whom I had raised as a single mother while juggling jobs, was the most painful. What you're doing is insane. Daniel, are you really betraying me to marry him? Are you really sure about this? I asked my daughter as if to confirm. What? Are you being sarcastic? Sorry for taking Mom's husband. Seeing Daniel's unrepentant attitude, I realized it wasn't a temporary lapse of judgment. Fine, that's enough. Understanding that nothing I said would change anything, I quietly accepted the divorce papers, signed and stamped them, and handed them back to Frank.
Now that this is done, get out. This is mine and Daniel's place. You're no longer needed here, old woman.
Holding back tears of frustration, I packed my things and left the familiar apartment. Why did I have to go through this? I was hurt, but there was nothing I could do about them. The betrayal of my daughter, whom I had raised with all my might, was the hardest blow. 3 months passed, and after being kicked out of the apartment, I returned to my parents' home. One day, Frank and Daniel suddenly appeared, looking furious.
Hey, Sophia, what's the meaning of this, you thief?
As soon as Frank saw me, he started shouting. I had a good idea why Frank was so angry, but I feigned ignorance. What are you talking about? We've been strangers for a long time. It's rude to show up out of nowhere.
You stole my money, didn't you? There's no one else it could be. Where did you take my savings?
Frank ignored my words and continued accusing me of theft. Coming here and calling me a thief is rude.
The rent and utility payments have stopped, and collection notices are arriving. Where did you take my money?
Actually, I had been paying the rent and utilities for the apartment with the money I earned from working. Frank had always been a spendthrift, using up his salary without any thought. Ideally, he should have lived within his means, but his spending exceeded that, so my income was needed to cover living expenses. I had warned him about it before, but Frank never listened seriously. From the time we got married, he had been involved with Daniel. To him, my words were just annoying noise. Since I managed all the finances, Frank had no idea how much money he had. When we divorced, he paid me a large amount of alimony, thinking his income was sufficient, but it left him with no savings. Even after the divorce, he continued his spending habits, and eventually, his savings ran dry. What are you misunderstanding? I didn't steal any money. The reason there's no money left is because you spent it all without checking your savings.
That can't be. I'm a company executive. You must have stolen my salary. Give it back, you thief.
Frank refused to accept my explanation and kept shouting that I had stolen the money. Mom, you're jealous of our relationship and stole the money out of spite, right? It's not too late, so just give it back quietly. Daniel also accused me of theft. Their voices were so loud that the neighbors could hear. But that was their mistake. Our family had been living here for decades, and we had good relations with our neighbors. Feeling something was wrong, one of the neighbors called the police. We could hear the siren of a police car in the distance.
What? The police? Why?
Frank finally realized the seriousness of his actions and started to panic. The police car stopped in front of the house, and the officers rang the doorbell to ask about the situation.
No, I just came to ask where the missing money is.
We received a report of loud, threatening voices. It wasn't just a conversation. What you were doing was intimidation. We'll hear the details at the station.
My mother let the police into the house, and despite Frank's attempts to explain, the officers insisted on taking him to the station for questioning. And, unfaithfully, Daniel tried to escape through the backyard but was caught by the police. I just came to see my mother. Why do I have to be arrested? Mom, help me. I'm your daughter. Daniel pleaded with me to help her.
She's claiming to be your daughter. Is that true?
The officer looked puzzled, but I shook my head and denied it. No, she's not my daughter. She's my niece. And right now, she's just an intruder causing trouble. Please take them away. Daniel looked stunned by my words. What? Wait, Mom? What do you mean I'm your niece, not your daughter? Mom? I had intended to keep the truth a secret forever, but Daniel's selfish actions left me no choice. In reality, Daniel was not my child but the child of my twin sister, Nancy. Nancy had rebelled against our parents from a young age and ran off with a man she picked up in town. After having a child, Nancy was abandoned by the man and returned home, but our parents disowned her. Nancy planned to put the child in an institution, but I, who was married and struggling to have a child, felt sorry for Daniel and decided to take her in. Daniel and I were aunt and niece, which explained the resemblance. I decided to raise Daniel in place of Nancy, against our parents' wishes. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Help me. Mom. As Daniel was pushed into the police car, she kept shouting for me, but I ignored her cries and watched them being taken away. After a stern warning from the police, Frank and Daniel were released. Daniel seemed shocked to learn that I wasn't her real mother. I revealed all the hidden truths to Daniel after she was released. I told her that her real mother abandoned her and disappeared, and that even I don't know who her father is. Daniel hung her head in dejection. "No way, you're lying. I can't believe I have another mother." "No, it's true. I've always tried to raise you as if you were my own daughter. But maybe I spoiled you too much." Beside Daniel, Frank also looked apologetic, staring at the floor. It seemed the police had pointed out that the depletion of their savings was not because I had embezzled anything, but because Frank had spent recklessly without checking the balance.
I'm sorry for everything. But can you lend us a little money? Come on, we were married.
Please, even if I'm not your daughter, we're still blood-related family, right? You can't abandon family in need, can you? Despite their persistent pleas, my parents and I kicked them out of the house. Don't ever come near us again. You're not family anymore. After being refused by us, they went to Frank's family and friends to borrow money. But Frank's reputation as a man who cheated on his wife with her daughter had spread, and no one was willing to lend them money. Realizing they had no choice but to live within their means, they moved into a small apartment. But then, a woman in her 60s suddenly visited Daniel. "Daniel, you've grown into such a fine adult. I'm your mother. I'm in trouble and need money. Can you help me?" "What are you saying? Showing up out of the blue?" As Daniel and Frank tried to turn her away, the woman forced her way into their apartment. "Your real mother is in trouble. As my daughter, you should help me." The woman, dressed in makeup that made her look younger than she was and an age-inappropriate miniskirt, was my twin sister Nancy, who had abandoned Daniel and disappeared. Disowned by our parents, Nancy had flitted from one no-good man to another, now drowning in debt and struggling to survive. Nancy knew where Daniel lived because, during her recent attempt to borrow money from our elderly parents, I had given her Daniel and Frank's address. A few days ago, desperate for money, Nancy had visited our parents for the first time in decades. I had the presence of mind to suggest, "Why don't you try relying on your own daughter?" And gave her Daniel's address. "You abandoned me, and now you call yourself my mother? Get out." "What? No way. I'm your real mother. You have to take care of me." The two started a loud argument. Despite Daniel's resistance, Nancy forced her way into their apartment. Frank ended up using most of his retirement money to pay off Nancy's debts, and now had to support her as well. After retiring, Frank had to take on part-time jobs at construction sites and security companies to make ends meet, working hard to earn a living. Daniel reluctantly started working nights, but Nancy took all the money she made. Their earnings were consumed by Nancy, leaving Frank frustrated with a life where his hard-earned money was squandered by Daniel and her mother constantly fighting. Eventually, Frank disappeared without a trace. Left alone, Daniel now had to live with her real mother, Nancy. Although I couldn't help but feel some pity, I realized that this outcome might have been for the best. As for me, I recently met a man through a hobby. He lost his wife a few years ago and lives alone now. We're not sure if we'll get married, but we enjoy spending time at each other's houses, maintaining a good relationship. He's great at cooking and often makes my favorite pasta. I haven't felt this content in a long time. Being with him, time flows gently, and I find myself smiling naturally. Perhaps this simple, ordinary life is the happiest, and I'm moving forward one step at a time. Please subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.